This is Jeff Wickwire, heard daily on Bible School Radio 91.3, KDKR, Decatur, Dallas-Fort Worth, and on 91.3 KYJC, Commerce.
Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, the consequences for not taking care of the little things with your car. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Good afternoon, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know, I do appreciate it. Tony Joe's with me as he is every Friday to do the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. 1-877-913-5357 is the number to call. If you've got a question for Tony Joe, I'll bet you that he's got an answer for you. I've known Tony Joe now for how long has it been? See, 2021. My first thought. Turn up your mic first. There you go. Still being very professional over here.
How long have we known each other? Well, my first thought would be a long time.
20 plus years.
Long time.
It is a long time.
I remember when you were just fresh out of college.
I don't think you've known me since that. That's a pretty long time.
Well, speaking of which,
yes,
let's let the listeners in on a little anniversary. A lot of things happening today. First of all, today is the anniversary of Bob becoming a financial planner. Established, graduated, licensed, and started his career as a financial planner. How many years was that?
32. It's been 32 years.
32 years. I'm going to guess 1991?
1992.
92, okay. The other thing about today that's special that a lot of people may not realize, it's the longest day of the year. And with that comes, of course, it's fixing to get hot. We all know that. But the longest day of the year is what we call, I believe it's called the summer solstice. Okay? Mm-hmm. Summer solstice.
Right.
So my thinking as an automotive repair guy, because everything I think relates to cars, that the only cars that should be allowed on the road today are Pontiac Solstices. And then in the December 21st, when we call that the winter equinox, the only cars that should be allowed on the road that day would be Chevy Equinox. But that's just me.
1-877-913-5357. I think we're going to have because this no joke policy is not working.
Well, those were just facts.
I think you need to have it approved before the program.
During all the hours of prep time, you mean?
Yeah.
That's another thing. You know, you think about the time we spend on the program with all the prep time, the hours of prep and everything that goes into it. That's a big chunk of time out of your life, you know?
Yeah, the 5 to 10 minutes we spend before the program.
Well, I mean, we've got to consult with the 57 staff members and make sure everything's good to go and get everything approved.
Yeah, of course everybody knows you're kidding. 1-877-913-5357. So today, Tony Joe, I thought something we should talk about. We talk about the small maintenance things that you do to keep your car on the road, but we don't really talk about how important they are and what happens if you don't take care of the small things. Mm-hmm. And these are things that, oh man, easy to put off. So very easy to put off. And I'll do that later, and then later becomes a couple of years, and you still don't get it done, and then you really pay for it then. Whereas if you'd have taken care of it at the time, that it wouldn't be that big of a deal. The one thing that you've preached for years is to change your oil. And everybody, yeah, I know. Got to change your oil. But you do it every 5,000, 3,000, 8,000, whatever it is, miles. Yeah, I know that. I know to do that. Car tells me to do that. But if you don't change your oil, it could be very, very detrimental, especially for those that are going to be that buy a car and go, I'm going to keep my car for a long time. I think people are keeping them a lot longer these days. I know that with higher interest rates on car loans and lower inventories, higher prices, people are definitely kind of pushing back and saying, "Yeah, I'm going to try to keep my car going for as long as possible." That environment may not change for a couple of years. So talk a little bit about why or what can happen if you don't change your oil.
Okay. Oil changing is the most boring topic on earth because everybody knows, they've heard of it. Yeah, you got to change your oil. But let's go deeper into the thought of that and figure out, why do you really have to? Is it necessary? And what could happen if you don't? So here we got an engine that is the major expense proportionally to any repairs that would have to be done to the automobile, regardless of what kind of car it is. And you've got all these internal parts that are moving when the engine's running. You cannot have a tune-up. You cannot put any kind of good fuel in there. You cannot do a lot of things to the engine. But internally, the parts that are really important, that need proper lubrication, are inside the engine. And if you don't keep that oil clean, full, and changed every now and then, you're going to really have a lot more trouble than even 10 years ago. Most cars today, most engines are sophisticated to the point where they have adapted what we call variable valve timing. And that's way too technical to go into, but it's suffice it to say that there are a lot of moving parts involved. And all those parts need oil, and they need clean oil, and they need the right weight oil. And they need to have that oil changed every now and then, because when the oil starts to build up hydrocarbon deposits known as sludge throughout the engine, the oil can't circulate very well. It's like cholesterol in your veins. So you need to keep a good, clean change of oil. And if you don't do that, these internal parts, which have no other job in life other than to keep the engine running, and the only thing you have to do to them is keep them lubricated. That's not asking a whole lot. The technology of today's engines usually will take them 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 miles. But if you don't change the oil, the little things like hydrocarbon buildup, sludge, things like that, will start to affect the amount of flow that you can get throughout the system due to restrictions of oil flow. Now, when that happens, you're getting less lubrication to those parts, the oil pressure is lower, and it's really, really hard to overcome that. Even if you forgot to change the oil and you think you're going to make it up in the next 2 or 3 oil changes, I'm going to do it right on time. Just one time, Bob, and it's too late. Just once. Once the damage is done, it's only a matter of time before that damage rears its ugly head, and you're going to be faced with either replacing the engine or doing a really expensive repair on the engine. Now, I wanted to address something that you said about, yeah, I know, I'll change it every 3,000 to 5,000. The car tells me when to change it. Stop right there. I want to draw a red flag to what that means and explain why. When you think, which a lot of people do, that the car is going to tell you when to change the oil, let's talk about that just for a minute so that you can understand why I'm not a proponent of waiting till the car tells you. When they build an automobile today, it's a global market. They have to satisfy the conditions wherever that car may end up. It could be in China. It could be in Russia. It could be in the North Pole. It could be in the south part of the country, Australia. So What they've done is come up with happy mediums. That's what I call it. I call it happy mediums. What kind of oil is it going to have, and what weight will it have to have, and how often will it have to be changed? Well, the problem is they've come up with this happy medium for the type of oil, the weight of the oil, and the length of time between oil changes. However, that is for wherever this car will end up. Now, here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where we have really hot summers, now those parameters are not going to fit as well, and it's going to be you that suffers, not the car company. They don't care if you have to replace your engine. You want to protect your own interests, which means change the oil no more than 5,000 miles between intervals. I like to tell people 3,000, because around 4,000 you start to feel guilty enough where you're going to get it done. But 3,000 to 5,000 is a good statistic to use for oil change intervals. And also, we need to remember you need enough of the right stuff, which means if you don't know what kind of oil your oil should take, what weight, then look it up. Make sure that's what you're getting. Make sure you're getting your oil changes done before that little flag comes on in the car and says you need an oil change, a little maintenance light, because oftentimes those lights can be set for 7,500 mile intervals. Well, 7,500 miles between oil changes is way too long, in my opinion, to go between oil changes. And you can argue the point, well, I use synthetic oil. Well, there's a whole story about that we could go into. I still don't think 7,500 miles is a good way to go. And if you're waiting for the maintenance light to come on in your car to tell you when it's time to change the oil, you're doing it wrong. You're hurting yourself in the long run. You get an oil change, you get a sticker with the mileage dated 5,000 miles away from the mileage you have on the instrument panel right now. And when you get to that point, you go get it again. You look at the sticker. Do not depend on the car telling you when to change the oil.
This is Bob Brooks. If you want to talk to Tony Joe, 1-877-913-5357. Do have a line open. We're up against a break. Stick around. I'll be right back. Hello, this is Bob Brooks. Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the exact same verse word for word. I call them the stewardship verses of risk. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. On the Prudent Money Radio Show, we teach about risk, how to identify it, how to figure it out, and what to do about it. We believe that to be a prudent steward, you have to be a good risk manager. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show on Bible School Radio 91.3. Prudent Money, home of the modern-day steward movement.
The Apostle Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians highlights the hallmarks of genuine pastoral care. Find out why a balance between truth and love is essential, why only God's Word transforms lives, and why the love between believers transcends the ordinary. Join us this week on Truth for Life with Alistair Begg.
Weekdays at 5:30 a.m. here on 91.3 KDKR.
Hi, I'm Jan Markell, host of Understanding the Times. We're very excited to be a part of Bible School Radio. I hope you will join me Saturday, 10 a.m. for cutting-edge guests and the latest information to help you discern the truth, even the inconvenient truth. We'll help you understand our times and contend for the faith. That's Understanding the Times, Saturday at 10 a.m. right here on Bible School Radio or anytime at olivetreeviews.org.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. 1-877-913-5357. We've got several small items to mention, but one that we talked about literally a minute before we went on air is one that I want to go ahead and bump up to number 2, because people do this all the time and don't realize the problems that they're potentially creating, and that is wait until your gas gauge gets down to not to the red light, but it says 10 10 miles or left. And I will say firsthand, for those of you who have not tempted fate by doing that, it actually disappears like at 9 or 8 miles. You have no idea how much gas you got. So anyway, talk about why.
How do you know that, Bob?
I watch my wife to do it.
Oh, I see.
My wife do it.
You had your wife watch.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because that's kind of an interesting thing that will help people in the long run too. I'm glad you brought that up, because it happens a lot, and I do not blame anybody. I'm bad about it myself. However, I understand today's economy and today's insurance got to be paid, and all the bills and everything's high, and the electricity, and sometimes the car gets down quarter or less, and you just don't have time, or you just got so many other things to do, and you don't live that far away from work, and you can go. Well, I understand that part of it, but also I want to explain something about that just so you'll have the information. And that is that first of all cars today, most cars, 99.9% have electric fuel pumps located inside, submerged in the gas tank. And what surrounds the fuel pump is gasoline. And the reason it's in there is not just to pump fuel to the engine. Well, it is. That's its most prominent reason for being in there. But it's cooled by that gasoline that surrounds it. So when you think about that, if you've got less than a quarter of a tank, or a quarter of a tank even, most pumps sit down into a little sump so that it can get the last little bit of fuel out of the tank without you running out of gas. But the problem is when you have a low reserve of fuel in the tank, and you're going around corners, and you're coming to stops and accelerating, you're kind of like letting that gasoline flow away from the pump, towards the pump, away from the pump. And that pump is constantly running, and it's an electric motor. So an electric motor develops heat. The heat is dissipated through the liquid fuel to keep it cool, keep it below a certain temperature. When you go around corners and the gas kind of flows away from the pump, it's going to get that pump warmer than it should for a few seconds, and then the gasoline may flow back and kind of cool it off. But it's not a good practice. The reason you want to keep at least, the best thing you could do is just operate off the top half of the tank. That's what I call, my kids and stuff, I've always tried to teach them. They don't do it, but try to fill it up, and when it gets down to half a tank, fill it back up. Don't let it get down low, quarter of a tank or less, because you're asking for premature failure of the fuel pump. That's not a cheap fix. If that fuel pump gets hot too many times, it's going to shorten its lifespan. When the fuel pump goes out, it can leave you on the side of the road. You're going to have to get it towed. You're going to have to change the fuel pump, which is expensive. And there really doesn't have to be that way. If you just have the knowledge of, don't let your car get down really low on fuel and keep driving it that way. Why? Well, for the reasons I just described to you. And that's all I can advise people. Bob, I can tell you why you shouldn't do it. And then people can do what they want from there. But at least I'm trying to, give them the information about why it's bad.
Let me ask you a question, and I didn't get a chance to ask this before we sit down and do the program, but we've talked, or you've talked about in the past, that there's different grades, quality of gas, and how in the short term you can actually have problems if you use low quality gas, cheaper gas. What about over the long term? Let's say that you decide to go to the local convenience store and they're using low quality gas, and you decide that's where I'm going to stop every time to get gas, and the majority of your gas comes from that. Could that cause long-term problems?
Sure. And let me just say that even though that will do different kind of damage than what we were just discussing with heat and the short life of the fuel pump, Well, it can also shorten the life of the fuel pump, the fuel injectors, the fuel lines, the fuel regulator, everything related to the fuel system. The reason for that is because ethanol is a alcohol, and it's made from corn, and it is part of the fuel formulating process. And we have they say up to 10%, and none of us have a choice. I mean, if we live in Dallas, Fort Worth, Collin County, Tarrant, Dallas, and like San Antonio, Harris County, the big cities, they have the pollution standards that require this oxygenate to be in the fuel. In our case, it's ethanol, and it is for air pollution standards, but it also kind of is harsh on the fuel system. It can cause different problems with the rubber portions of the fuel system, which include, the pump, the lines, the injectors, the regulators. Everything has either a rubber diaphragm or some portion of the device that uses very small screens, rubber diaphragms, and different very susceptible parts that are prone to be either plugged up or damaged by a large amount of alcohol in the fuel. And in our case, 10% is a pretty large amount. And in a lot of cases, it's more than that. There's ways to take a sample of what's in the tank and actually measure how much ethanol is in the fuel that's in the tank of that car. And you can find more than 10% in some vehicles if you take the time to sample it out. So it's really harsh on the system. It's not good for the car, but that goes into things like not burning the fuel properly can cause a check engine light to come on, for catalytic converter problems and all kinds of associated issues that have nothing to do with the real problem.
One of the things that you mentioned when we were talking about this earlier was, and I never would have known this, was coolant, how important changing that coolant is every couple of years.
A lot of people don't realize, but part of the maintenance package is to change the coolant every now and then. And every now and then, from what I can gather, in most just kind of overlooking general maintenance for most cars, which is a large area to cover, 2 to 3 years, you should have the coolant drained, have the cooling system flushed, and then have new coolant installed. Why would you do that when the coolant is perfectly good and it looks great that's in the car? It's because with the modern automobile today, there's an awful lot of electronic devices that have to do with the engine. We've all known this. A lot of sensors, a higher charging system rate, bigger batteries. There's more electricity involved. And a lot of times when that coolant flows through the engine, through the tubes going to the heater core itself, back through the water pump, and then down through the aluminum, in many cases, radiator, aluminum core radiators, it builds up a static electrical charge. This process we know as a form of electrolysis. It builds up a charge, if you will, Bob, into the coolant. Coolant is supposed to just be liquid, not freeze in the winter, harder to boil in the summer. But if it contains an electrical charge, it will actually interact with parts of the vehicle. The heater core, the radiator, and the aluminum tubing are the most susceptible parts. But it can also damage other parts of the cooling system, like the water pump impeller and other things that will end up costing you a lot of money. So to prevent a buildup of electrolysis in the coolant, the best thing you can do is drain it all out of there. Whether you flush it or not is one thing, but getting the old stuff out of there and replenishing it with brand new mixture, getting the mixture proper, 50-50 mixture with water and coolant, and putting it back that way every couple of years, maybe every 3 years is good enough. But it's something that a lot of people don't do.
Is it important to do it by the amount of miles or the amount of time?
It's going to go by the amount of years, the amount of time. The mileage doesn't matter because there's a lot of electrical stuff that's going on in your car, even when it's off. And you think it's parked in the garage, you're going to bed at night. There's things that are computers that are still awake, memories that are still up and running. I mean, it does shut down over a longer period of time, but there's a lot of electrical activity still going on in your car, even when it's off.
Lots of things to consider. I would think that coolant out of the list, of course, we'll have to get to this next week, but it's probably the one thing people don't do like they should. But
well, a lot of people don't know they should.
That's
so
right.
Now
that's right.
They know.
This is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.